Lastly, New Hampshire State Representative Eric Turer provided us with a state legislative update.
I'm Eric Turer from Brentwood. Currently the state rep for Brentwood. We have 1 1/3 state reps, so we share another one with Fremont and Danville. And prior to being state rep, I was the chair of the Brentwood Dems for about 20 years. Great, thank you for inviting me. It's really kind of an honor to be thought of as having something I can share with a neighboring town.
I'm very grateful for Eric making the trip over from Brentwood to speak with us tonight and give us a little bit of an introduction to the highs and lows from the last session in the State House. Maybe talk a little bit about what you think are going to be the hot issues ahead. And then tell us what it's like being a first-term state rep.
We're super lucky in New Hampshire to have this type of government that we do. You are really connected to the people, and the partisanship in terms of like the committees and stuff. Every bill gets a vote. Every bill gets a hearing that comes up. Every bill gets a vote in committee. Every bill technically gets a vote on the floor. It's actually pretty easy to serve in terms of the fact that you're not just being shoved around. Like the last few terms, the Republicans had big majorities, so ultimately we lost a lot of those votes. What I'll say in this past session, I don't know if you all saw the news about the big kumbaya moments around the budget and everything, and I've been leaning again into these kumbaya moments because I'm like, it shows that we actually are doing something, and that this unity and let's get back together kind of thing is the theme people want to hear. Might not be the theme that the Republicans that were in total control before wanted to hear, but we have Republican majorities in the House, the Senate, and the Executive Council. All 3 of those had majority Democratic popular votes. So it's one indication of kind of what we're up against, and also an indication that we could flip this pretty well if we can, the redistricting we're stuck with for a while, but the other stuff is not that far out of sight, even though, when you look at numbers like the Senate, which 14-10, Republicans. In the House, the nice thing, and this will be my last part of this current session, is the Democrats were largely united, largely around very popular things like, supporting your town's quality education, but cutting the cost, distributing the cost more fairly to the towns, supporting, the pensions and things, starting to return some of that money back to the towns. So a lot of it ends up being tax cuts locally. We keep trying to push the message that, these cuts that they make in Concord aren't tax cuts. They're tax cuts for somebody, but they're tax increases locally. So the Republicans were not largely united. They really are 3 completely separate parties on most issues, many issues. They've got your libertarians, like your secessionists, who think the government should do nothing and should basically more or less go away. You've got your social conservatives, which are, almost the polar opposites of them in many ways. They are very much about controlling intimate aspects of people's existence. And so those groups, do not come together easily. And then you've got your old sort of timey fiscal conservative Republicans in the middle, who this is all foreign, I think, to a lot of them, the older timer ones that, because there were no social issues not too long ago, and now they're like all you hear about. So what happened with those budget votes is the Republican majority in the finance committees put out a very right-leaning Republican budget, and right up till the day before those votes, we were going to oppose those budgets. But then the Republicans had to come to leadership of the Democratic committee and say, hey, we don't have the votes to pass the budget. And what would it take to get, your folks on board? And they made concessions, and we all looked at it literally the day of the vote and said, this is just infinitely better than it was, which is kind of like the best message I could think of, because it's like actually what I think is supposed to happen in Concord. So we didn't get everything we wanted. There's a couple of things that I really hope we can make people aware of in the next election cycle. Like my biggest one being they they had already voted to end what's called the interest and dividends tax in New Hampshire. Over a 4-year cycle, they accelerated that. So basically, it ends after this next year. That's the 5th largest source of revenue in the state, and it's paid for almost entirely by less than 5% of the state's population that that earned that money off of
It's a great
investments.
tax. It's the most progressive tax in the country.
It's the most progressive
Wealthiest
tax.
people.
It was, but now they're not paying it anymore.
Yeah.
And the only reason they cut that tax was because they said it's a tax on income, because interest and dividends is income. They could have made some reforms, that would protect elderly people a little bit more who are living on that, but instead they just wiped it out. And so there's going to be a big budget deficit. Everyone's going to be, if that means less revenue sharing to the town, everyone's taxes are going to go up. And they're going to blame the Democrats somehow because we didn't cut taxes. It's the Republican tax cut. So that was one policy thing that I think needs to, it's a done deal at this point for this next year. So I don't think it's going to be a hot button issue as far as voting, but it's going to be hopefully a hot button issue in terms of messaging and making people aware, or I hope it is. The abortion stuff is really backfiring, I think, pretty badly on the Republicans. I'm on the Judiciary Committee where all the rights-based stuff goes through. So, we had a slew of abortion bills that ran the gamut from, completely repealing their Sununu's 24-week, Fetal Life Protection Act. My wife's an obstetrician, so she'll be the first one to tell you, we don't have any abortions after 24 weeks in New Hampshire. Even the medically necessary ones get transferred to Boston. So, it's sort of a bill about nothing, but it became like, the precious, the thing that cannot be changed. And so, it was the Republicans on our committee. So that we had, getting rid of all that to, a 6-week abortion ban, and it was the Republicans that on our committee that led the votes on killing most of those. There were ones that we split on, but they were the sort of moderate ones. The 6-week ban, never saw the light of day. Because I think that is, again, people are waking up to the fact that, these things aren't guaranteed, and that, just because it's not, fully on in New Hampshire doesn't mean that people aren't paying attention to what, I don't know if you saw Ohio, totally, upended. They put a ballot measure on, and it got many more votes than it needed to pass. They tried to raise the threshold for passing it, and that went down in flames. So there's these signs around. So I think that's going to be a hot button issue. The school vouchers, we managed to beat back to some degree, but they're still there and they're still growing a little bit. In case everyone doesn't know, these voucher programs, 85 to 90% of the money is people whose kids were already in private or home schools. And now these homeschool situations are starting to consolidate. There's these company that's basically promoting people signing up, opening their homes, and then sort of becoming the recipient of about a bunch of these homeschools, so it's turning into little private, living room schools. Maybe some of them are great, but they really have no oversight. They have administrative fees that these groups take for managing, the money. So the House has voted to legalize marijuana consistently. The Senate is less warm to the idea, and the governor said he would veto it under most circumstances. I think now he's saying under certain circumstances he might accept it. We'll see, since he's not running again. Maybe he'll be more open to it this time, because maybe he can find the magic bullet. It's a complicated one. I mean, I come from the public health world. I think our state has huge reliance on these industries that it basically says are bad for you and you shouldn't do them, and then basically promotes the heck out of them at every turn. I'm actually probably going to introduce a bill to at least have the state liquor stores promote awareness of the signs of alcoholism and referral numbers to with each sale, like something they can give out with each sale. Hopefully that'll pass, because I just think it's crazy that, you know, we have one of the higher alcoholism rates in the country, and you know, almost every alcoholic in our state has a probably daily, if not or weekly, interaction with the state, you know, and we don't provide anything in terms of, you know, information or promotion, you know. So the marijuana is like that. It's actually not as addictive as alcohol or tobacco or gambling, but, you know, but it's still one of these things that, you know, the only reason it's not fully private is, you know, because it does have some downside effects for, you know, for people. So why it hasn't passed, I think, is more, you know, politically for certain groups. For the Republicans, it's not as tenable. But again, these free state people, the libertarians, they're all about, like, you know, I mean, they've tried to legalize more than just marijuana. They've tried to legalize everything. You know, everything, right? So,
Thank you.
well, thank you. I hope I hit on some of the things that I'll probably think of 10 things on the whole that answer your question about what are we really going to pay attention to.